Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about Terraform provider contributions, some do's and don'ts for success. So by way of introduction, my name is Justin DeFrank. I'm a senior solution engineer here at HashiCorp. A little bit of my background, I've had a nearly 10-year career with a mix of sales engineering jobs, product management roles, core engineering, and even DevOps roles. I've been working on and off with Go since about 2017. Since being here at HashiCorp, I've made many small contributions to multiple Terraform providers, including the HashiCorp cloud platform provider, and AWS. I'm also the main dev and maintainer of the Datadog Secrets plugin for HashiCorp Vault. There at the bottom is my Twitter, or X, I guess we're calling it nowadays, handle. And just a point out there, all those opinions are my own, not that there really are many there. So a little bit of background, right? We've all been there. We've had some of these thoughts before, right? We find some type of deficiency in a Terraform provider. We have the Go skills to solve it, but we want to start to tackle those problems. Maybe it's a missing resource type, could be functionality that doesn't work as expected, missing test case, something that you think might need to be there. And what we're going to do actually is the next few slides, we're going to outline some core steps that you can take in order to be successful when contributing to Terraform providers. So the first thing you should look to do is really understand the code repo, and then also within those code repos, the different contribution and developer guides. There's probably going to be a lot of small caveats that need to be addressed, or some type of checklist that's required to complete. Now, when we look at the different repos, there are probably many different forms of contribution guides you've seen before, and some might live within the repo. Some are going to be links inside the repository that might take you elsewhere. Those sites might be hosted elsewhere. Ultimately, what it comes down to is try to do your best and find and understand the entire contribution guide and as it's laid out. You're also going to want to follow the code of conduct with regards to contributions. And if one doesn't exist, right, then put your best foot forward. And ultimately, what we mean here is being inclusive, having neutral tone, neutral type, and ultimately a good template to follow here is the HashiCorp community guidelines, which you can find in most of the HashiCorp repositories. So you're going to want to follow the style too. So when you're writing your contributions, you're going to want to make sure that you're matching the style of the code that's in each of the different repositories for the different providers. So we've got two examples, and it's on two different slides. That way it's not an eye chart. But this is code from the Boundary Terraform provider for creating a scope. Right, now, two things to notice before we move on. Right, number one, there's a lack of custom timeouts for this resource, and you can see where that would live under schema.resource. It would be somewhere in that top section there. And another thing to call out here is the strings in the string to schema.schema map are either global constants or constants that are defined in this local resource specified file. So on the previous slide, we looked a little bit of code for a Boundary Terraform provider for creating a scope. Here's code for the HashiCorp cloud platform provider for creating a Boundary cluster itself. Now, between the previous slide and this slide, there are subtle differences in the style of each of these resources or resource definitions. When we look at the HCP provider boundary cluster resource here, it's got non-default timeouts defined. You can see here towards the bottom of the top section, whereas the boundary scope resource has global and local constants defined for the strings and the string to schema map. While the boundary cluster resource here uses inline strings. So just these little subtle differences to look out for when you're working through making your contributions, just making sure that you're maintaining that style. And this is really important to follow the style as closely as possible, because it makes it easier at the end of the day for folks who work with this code day in and day out to review pull requests, and enables ultimately that consistent development experience. So that way, somebody who checks the code out next after you make your contributions, it'll all look very streamlined. So testing. And this is much more of a kind of overarching Go concept, right? But Within the providers themselves, we also do want to make sure that we're testing everything that that's being executed. And taking a step back, why do we test? So we always want to ensure that the outcomes from initial code writing or even an incremental change to the code base are what we're expecting. There's going to be a general flow to tests that already exist within the repository. You should ultimately do your best to follow that flow and not introduce any additional complexity if unnecessary. Things like additional modules or kind of big rewrites, just generally unwelcomed. At a bare minimum, you should mock up the, or I guess take a step back, looking at actually writing some of these tests, you should start to mock up the HCL config of your resource, if you're adding a resource in this case, and check the functionality with regards to required parameters, right? That seems like some table stakes stuff, but a lot of the time people forget to do that. One thing to note, the Terraform SDK contains helper modules that can simplify the creation of tests. And a lot of the times they're in use in several of the Terraform providers already, so you can reference those within the repositories that you're working inside. And then if all else fails, right, when in doubt, ask for help. So create a work in progress pull request, submit that, and then ask for some help in the comments, and then the folks that maintain those providers will get back to you. And lastly here, just want to talk a little bit about integration tests. So some of the larger Terraform provider repositories are configured with CI/CD pipelines to build tests, do a lot of those automated functions. And what they're ultimately doing is running these integration tests at some point in the CI/CD pipeline to the systems that they're interacting with. Maybe it's AWS or GCP, Azure, Cockroach, MongoDB, you name it. So what you're going to want to do is really just do your best not to introduce any breaking changes, but keep an eye on any CI/CD automation. I'm thinking GitHub Actions, for example. Right? You want to make sure you check back in your pull requests, especially when you submit it. Make sure that any changes that you've committed in there, anything, keep your eyes open for anything that looks out of place. Right? It might be a failed CI/CD pipeline or anything like that. So just wanted to say thanks. I know this was kind of a lightning session, but thanks for watching and happy coding.